All righty. Good morning, everyone. I'm watching the attendance list increase, so we'll slowly jump in here. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. We know it's the afternoon for you East Coasters over there. Thank you for coming to this week's live webcast. My name is Molly Proct. I am joined every single week by a number of different Aduro coaches. And for those that are joining for the very first time, or maybe a bit unfamiliar, Aduro is a human performance company existing at the intersection of well-being and performance. Amongst many things, we provide expert coaching and interactive content to ignite company culture and build social connections, just like we're doing here, and ultimately promote growth for all people. So if you missed last week and this is your first time, welcome. We are so excited to have you here. You'll notice Erica up here on the screen as well. We have no slides. We have no production team on the other end of our cameras here, and this is very intentional. Our vision for the next 30 minutes or so is to be a fairly organic, unscripted conversation and sprinkle in a little coaching pieces to it. Like many of you, we are in our homes working remotely and navigating this day by day as well. So our hope and our focus by the end of today is that you feel a sense of connectedness, not only with us, but also all of the other members that are on the line. And also that you walk away with a few commitments that can actually foster a sense of resilience during this time and purpose within the uncertainty that we're all going through. So before we launch into it, I want to go over the typical housekeeping items if you're unfamiliar with it or you didn't join last week. So you'll see that there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen there. And I want to encourage you to utilize that Q&A feature to ask us your questions or maybe bring up concerns that you're facing right now in your life. We always do our best to bring them into the conversation if we don't already kind of hit on them throughout kind of our brief outline that we want to go through today. And if we don't get to yours specifically or we don't have time, we absolutely try to bring it in for the next week's discussion. Also for today, if you've worked with coaches, you know that we work best by working with feedback from you. And so throughout today, we are going to be asking a few coaching questions, outward facing coaching questions that really are meant to spark some curiosity and perhaps shift your perspective a little bit. And so if you are comfortable, we encourage you to utilize that chat feature and share what's coming up for you during this part of the conversation. We'll kind of help lead you through it. If you do, I always want to make sure everybody knows, if you do, chats are visible to all attendees, so everybody will be able to see your chats. The Q&A feature is only visible to the panelists, so myself and Erica. So with that, you see her here. I am thrilled to be able to introduce my guest for today. She is one of Aduro's longest tenured coachers, Erica Klein. Erica, thank you. Welcome.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks, Molly.
Yes, us as well. So today, Erica and I will be talking through what it actually means to be intentional during this time and finding your purpose. Like what does that actually mean and how do we actually do that right now when it's really hard to do with all the uncertainty? So as we get settled into today for the next 20 minutes or so, we encourage you, if it's possible, to grab a pen, a piece of paper, a notepad, maybe pull up the notes section on your computer or your phone, if it's convenient, if it makes sense, but have something to kind of jot down with that you can kind of walk away and take it away and reference it after our session for today. So I'll give you a minute to do that as we do so. Erica, let's kind of just jump right into it. And you, in my opinion, are someone who I believe is able to adapt and has been able to adapt to so many different things in your life. And right now, you actually have a pretty good sense of clarity for yourself. So I'd love for you to start us off with kind of these overarching concepts of adaptability and purpose. And how, in your opinion, do you feel those two actually work together?
Yeah, definitely. So when I think about adaptability, for me, it really means just adjusting to situations that get thrown my way and ultimately creating intention around my experience by choosing how I want to respond to the change. One of my favorite quotes is by Desmond Tutu, and she says, "I can't control what happens to me, but I can control how I respond to it."
Oh, I want to highlight, you mentioned intention, and it jolted me a bit because I also when I think of purpose, I feel like purpose and intention are sometimes interchangeable,
Mhm.
right? And I just finished Shauna Shapiro's book, which if you don't know Shauna Shapiro, she was our very first guest on the first live cast. Highly recommend you watch that recording if you have not. But in her book, Good Morning, I Love You, she actually she describes intention beautifully, I feel. And she says that intention actually directs the compass of the heart. And in doing so, it reflects like what our deepest values and hopes are.
Mhm.
And it allows us to set the stage for all that is possible. And it kind of helps us stay connected to our blueprint for our life. And I think that's important because I love analogies, and I oftentimes view intention as the lighthouse of your life. And I also think it's really, really important to kind of go through this right now as well and kind of talk through it, that when we are out in the sea of life and we're kind of on our merry way, and especially right now, there's a little bit of tumultuous waters. Um, it can help us find our way back home. And so I think, especially right now, as we're all going through our own unique experience with the pandemic, I think right now it's especially important that we can find that lighthouse, and it can help us kind of direct us back to home, whatever kind of home means for you. Right?
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, and another way I look at it too is it ultimately puts me in the driver's seat where I'm able to operate from this place of thriving versus surviving. You know, when I'm being intentional, I get to choose what I want my experience to look like versus, sitting on the sidelines of my life and just letting life, pound at me. That's another way I look at it as well.
Yes. It makes me think like thriving versus surviving. And I think everybody that's on the line, like, do a quick like check with yourself right now. Like, would you say that you are thriving through this? And thrive, use loosely, because it would be hard right now to be fully thriving, fully flourishing. But are you feeling like you are just in a place of survival kind of every day as we wake up and we kind of go through this? And for those of you that were on last week with Coach Jansen, one piece that was really important that we worked through was being able to kind of name what you're feeling right now and name your emotions and recognize like what you need in order to move forward with intention and with purpose. So we want to kind of jump in by kind of bringing you along in this discussion a little bit today. And so I mentioned utilizing the chat feature earlier today. And so we want to help kind of you identify um, what this pandemic has kind of provided you thus far. And, if we think about the emotions or the feelings that maybe you identified last week, or maybe you just identified earlier in us speaking today, this is where we encourage you to utilize the chat feature and also write down what's coming up for you. But I want everyone on the line to think about, if you were to describe one word, in one word, or in using a theme, or maybe a couple of words, like describe your current experience with the COVID-19 pandemic. What would that be? And we'll kind of pause here and allow you all to kind of chat in. But describe, give it a theme, give it a word, give it an emotion. What has your emotion been? What would you say thus far your experience has been with COVID-19? And Erica, as we're letting those chats come in, I'd love to hear from you. What has kind of come up for you throughout it?
Yeah. I'll be honest. I know both of us are moms, right? So we're juggling a lot with both of, with our families, our daughters. So, there's been more days than not where I've wanted to pull my hair out. I'm frustrated. I'm more irritated than normal. And so, and there's a lot of guilt as a mom too, as far as trying to balance, everything that's being thrown at me. I don't know
Yeah.
if you can relate to that.
Yeah. When I think about we've all been in this for 4 or 6 weeks or so, right? And I also want to encourage you to also write down what that theme or that emotion or that word that maybe encompasses your experience for the most part. And also highlight, there's obviously has been some ebbs and flows through this. So don't think that it has to be congruent throughout the last 4 or 6 weeks. But I just remember my kind of go-to reaction is avoidance. And so at first I really wanted to avoid when I'm uncomfortable, when I'm uncertain with whatever it may be in my life, I avoid it. And so when this came up and it was, who's going to work, who's not going to work, what's going to happen with the kids, what's going to happen with school, I kind of wanted to shut it all out. And so my word would be avoidance, if I were to classify it, overall. And as we kind of get some chats in here, and thank you guys for chatting in. And again, I hope you kind of write this down because we're going to utilize this as we move forward today. But notice the similarities in what's coming up for all of you, right? We have adaptability. I love that. High expectations. Anita, I love how you mentioned that word expectations. We're going to actually talk about that in a little bit. Purpose, heightened purpose, slowing down, extremely emotional, I think is so common for most of us. And so I won't read all of them, but I encourage you to continue to chat in and also write it down for yourself too. And just think about where you are right now as you're showing up to this live cast today. If you look back on your last 4 to 6 weeks, what has been present for you in terms of an emotion or a theme or how you've kind of shown up? And Erica, this is something that we do on our coaching calls with our clients as well. And I'm sure that a lot of the themes that are popping up today on the chats is also what you've heard from everybody all over the country too, right?
Definitely. Yeah. Everybody's feeling really similar. I mean, everything that you guys are sharing is very relevant to what we're hearing on the phones for sure.
Yes. And I also want to highlight too, that if you notice, some of you have already kind of put in, and I would encourage you to write it down too. Notice the fluctuation of emotions too. And I think it's important to call out when you are in the space of recognizing what has been present for you, there is room for both spectrum, both sides of the spectrum of emotions, right? Like we can be really thankful and we can be safe and we can have the resources and we can be okay. And we can also be really scared and uncertain and worrisome. Both of those are not mutually exclusive. And I think we actually had a comment from last week that I think this is a perfect segue into is how do you kind of stay resilient and on purpose and manage your own feelings and expectations on one end and also support someone that's having a really hard time with it on the other end, whether that's a family member, your kids, or your spouse, and being able to hold both of those spaces kind of in your head and in your brain, I think allows us to be truly humans and allows us to kind of the mental space to have room for both of those and highlight both of those. Those are both okay. And one doesn't need to trump the other. And you can have one with the other as well. Oh, wonderful, you guys. So I hope everyone's kind of identified it, whether you've chatted in or not. Again, if you're comfortable, please chat in. Thank you to everyone who has chatted in. And I encourage you guys, scroll through here. Notice how everyone is experiencing a lot of things. Some are similar and some are unique. And so let's kind of take this intention where you're currently at. We've recognized what's present. And we now want to kind of move us into the realm of possibility and identifying kind of a purpose per se. And Erica, feel free to kind of jump into as we kind of navigate this. But when we think about what we want this time, and I'll caveat by the rest of this time, knowing that for most of us, we're kind of on the downhill towards a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, I think, depending on where you live. But when we think about what we want this time in our life or the rest of this time to give us, what would that be? Again, maybe a theme, an emotion, a word, an affirmation, a short affirmation, right? And we'll kind of pause here, and Erica, feel free to jump in kind of with what's come up for you too.
Yeah, Molly. So while everybody's thinking about that, I think for me, the word that's really come forward during this time has been growth. I made a decision early on when we talk about being intentional, creating purpose. For me, I kind of had this moment of, you know what, like we're all going through this unique time together. So why not make it count? And so for me, I just made this decision that I was like, you know what, I'm going to come out of this better than I went in. And that I've used as kind of the lens to kind of move me through all of this. And I'm not saying every day's been perfect and rainbows and flowers, but that has been a big thing for me in terms of just really focusing on the areas that I have control over.
Absolutely. I love how you mentioned kind of growth through this and coming out of it with growth. And as you hear Erica kind of share that, what comes up for me is like last 4 weeks, like I've had definite ups and downs, like emotional ups and downs. And if we're unaware, if we don't give ourselves the time to kind of identify them, they can kind of blanket over anything good that we want to create moving forward. And so again, for right now, as we kind of are sitting in the present, we're going to move to what we would ideally want the rest of this time to provide our lives. And so again, if you're comfortable, please chat it in so we can kind of see everything that's coming up. We can kind of create a group affirmation together and also write it down. I know it may seem silly, but getting it out of your head, either saying it out loud. We can't hear you, unfortunately, but feel free to talk to us at your computer. But write it down. If you were to create what this time could give you, what the rest of this time could give you, what would that be? And think about that. And we find this area of exploration really important, right, Erica? We know that this is important because oftentimes, and I'm going to pull a great line from one of my idols, Brene Brown, but she mentions, and I think this is actually attributed to even, other people, Nelson Mandela, et cetera, but perception is often a function of experience. And when we don't have the experience to shape our perspective, we tend to go to like the uncertainty. And in the uncertainty, we think about the worst case scenario. So I would say, think about when this first started and it first kind of got really serious, the pandemic. How many of you kind of went to this worst case scenario thinking in your mind? Or when schools all of a sudden shut down, right? Now we're all, schooling from home or all of these different things. Like a lot of us kind of went to the worst case scenario, and that's because we don't have experience with this. And so if we can create a little bit of certainty as we think about the rest of this time, right? If we can paint that picture a bit, and I see so many of you are chatting in here on what it is for you, that gives you a little bit more certainty. It gives you clarity, and it shuts down the fear part of your brain. Right, Erica, anything coming up for you?
Yeah, no, I just kept saying, yes, yes, yes. I love it. It's so true. It focuses your attention on those areas that you have control over. And so you feel this sense of empowerment, right? Like what I was saying before, as far as that analogy of just being in the driver's seat of your life versus just sitting on the sidelines. It gives a completely different perspective and mindset and focus. And I get really passionate about that.
Yeah, it inevitably will kind of energize you because all of a sudden you feel in your body what a little bit of empowerment and self-control actually feels like. Mm-hmm. And so for everyone that's kind of chatted in, thank you. And there's a lot of presence. There's a lot of, stretching outside of my limitations. Edward, I love that. Confidence, grounding, perspective, intentional connection. Like look at all these kind of beautiful intentions and affirmations that we're kind of creating as a group as we go through this, getting outside of your comfort zone. Yes, Sue. So I want to now kind of move into this idea, and one of you mentioned it earlier, we talked about this earlier, right, Erica, is this concept of expectation. And when we think about expectations, typically this is where we get some conflict in with our intention and our purpose. So Erica, what comes up for you when you think about just expectations in general, and also like what you've heard from your members as well?
Yeah, I think as humans, we tend to be the most critical with ourselves. I know that to be true for myself. I'm very goal oriented. I like structure. So anybody that knows me knows I like a certain level of certainty in my life. And as you can imagine, with everything that we're going through right now, there is a lot of uncertainty. So this need to kind of manage expectations and, have a certain level of control, it is a big deal. And I'm definitely hearing that on the phone a lot with my clients. When we really focus in on what we're talking about here in terms of creating meaning and intention, and kind of focusing in on those areas that they do have control over, people are just, it's like a huge shift for people. People are coming back going, okay, yes, there's hard days, this is, not easy, but wow, like I am having so much more of an appreciation for the time I'm having with my family, and the conversations with my clients are shifting in terms of like, what can I get out of this experience? Like, we talk about asking powerful questions, right? Like what that does for people versus, again, focusing on the problem and all of the negativity that's going on around. So I think managing expectations is huge, and really setting intention around that. And I know for myself, there's been a lot of days where I really need to readjust my expectations. And the biggest thing that's come up for me during this time is really slowing down and actually being present. And that being the only expectation is to just show up and look at what's right in front of me, like whether that's my daughter or my family. And that's a big thing for sure.
Yeah. I love this kind of reality checking your expectations. And oftentimes when we think about expectations and we have expectations, it almost, we look at them subconsciously as almost like a set of rules and like a playbook. And unless you follow those rules, unless you check your boxes for the day, you didn't meet your expectations. And so sometimes, Erica, like you said, like they can actually be doing us more of a disservice depending on how we regard our expectations of self, and even more so our expectations of others during this time. And so we want to kind of help you maybe set some new expectations. And especially during this time, there is a need, I think, to reality check your expectations. And this is definitely from Nelson Mandela, but he says like unrealistic expectations, and I add the unrealistic in there because I do think there's a benefit to having a certain level of expectations, but unrealistic expectations are future resentments waiting to happen. And so think about your typical day-to-day and what you wake up with feeling, what you want to get done at the end of the night. Are you feeling empowered, like you met your expectations, or did your expectations actually do a disservice? And kind of jot that down if that's important for you, right? Like my expectations don't serve me. How can I shift my expectations of myself? Or do I need to let go of expectations altogether during this time, especially, and just focus on my purpose? And so one last chat, and holy smokes, we really plowed through this time, but one last chat, and first and foremost, write it down. So you have this to keep, but like, I want you to think about how can your expectations of yourself and your day-to-day help you achieve your purpose for the rest of this time. Write it down, chat it in if you're comfortable. You can also put it in the Q&A to share just to me and Erica too. But think about like, do your expectations need to be checked so they actually support the purpose for the rest of this pandemic? To kind of pull the bridge together. I am gonna check the Q&A really quick. We have a lot of good chats coming in through the Q&A, so thank you for those too. We do have a question here, and Erica, I'd love to hear, as from a coach perspective, like how you would kind of handle this. And this one is very common. We hear this all the time. But this question is, what advice would you give to people right now that have either lost their jobs or are in fear of it, on top of the fear with the pandemic? How do you control these thoughts and these feelings of worst case scenario?
Yeah, what comes to mind is, some of what Jansen was sharing last week, right? Like, everything's not rainbow and flowers. And, I think really just like sitting in, that pain, like that's not easy, you can't just, cover it all up and pretend that it's all okay. There's I think about like some of these things that we're going through, there's a lot of grief that people are experiencing, right? And a lot of emotions. And so I think there's a time and a place to really kind of sit in that before just jumping to strategy.
Mm, I
And
like
just
that
having a
too.
certain level of empathy, like
Yeah.
that's hard. There's a lot of people, having a lot of loss during this time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like how you mentioned that, like even though it's very uncomfortable, sitting in it a little bit, and like we talked about last week, naming the emotion, naming kind of the specifics of what you're feeling. And I appreciate kind of bringing up, like, how do you kind of avoid that worst case scenario idea? And I think one way to do that is plan for what is more predictable instead of plan for the worst case scenario. And those two might be that feel like they're the same right now, but I would encourage you to really think through, is what's predictable in moving forward the same as the worst case scenario, or is it not? And how can you plan for and react to what is predictable and what is more certain, as you move forward than the worst case scenario. So I hope that answers your question. Feel free to chat in again if you have a continuum from there. Well, we are 3 minutes out. I appreciate all of your sharing, all of your chats so much. I hope, like we mentioned at the beginning, you were able to jot this down. You were able to kind of write down your thoughts throughout this session, because that is going to be so valuable for you to kind of touch base on. So we hope that you kind of identified where you came from, kind of what you showed up here with, and also what you actually want to walk away with from this session, and how can you actually get that a little bit more strategically than maybe some unrealistic expectations. So Erica and I will stay on just for another couple minutes until the bottom of the half hour. Thank you everyone so much. If you want to continue to chat in or continue to ask questions, please do so. We appreciate you. Thank you, Erica. Thank you so much. Any kind of last parting words as we wrap up?
No, I just want to say, don't get off the line until you've, written down that word or affirmation, that intention. We talked so much about that today. I think that is, so important. So I encourage you guys, don't get off if you don't have that word. Like, make it a point to kind of take the time right now to really get clear for yourself to move you forward.
Absolutely. Thank you, Erica. Thank you everyone for joining. We hope you have a wonderful day, and please join us next Thursday. Thank you. Take care.